When Ethan first laid eyes on her, she looked nothing like the vulnerable target he had expected. There she sat proud, poised, and immaculately dressed in the sun-drenched corner of her estate garden, sipping tea from a china cup that looked like it hadn't moved since the 1800s. Her silver hair was pulled back in a perfect bun, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, God, those eyes were sharper than any he'd seen. And he had seen plenty. Predators always knew other predators. Ethan had come prepared, of course. He'd rehearsed the charm, the subtle vulnerability, the romantic lilt in his voice. Everything calculated down to the moment he'd accidentally run into her outside the antique bookstore last Thursday. He even read up on 18th century porcelain to impress her. And it worked. Or so he thought. She invited him to tea the next day. Not to dinner. Not to a walk. Tea. Like royalty. Like someone who understood her value and didn't need to prove a damn thing. "So, Ethan," she said that day, her voice velvet wrapped around steel. "You said you're a writer?" "Yes." He smiled, leaning forward just a little. "Historical fiction. Mostly European war romance. I try to weave emotion into." "Emotion," she repeated, setting the cup down with the softest clink. "You must be very in touch with feelings that aren't your own." He blinked. "To suppose I try to be empathetic." "Empathy," she smiled. The kind of smile that made the skin on his neck prickle. "Isn't that the root of all good manipulation?" There it was. The first crack. Not in her, but in his plan. And she hadn't even moved. Her name was Margaret Evelyn Hargrave, a name that belonged in British aristocracy, or, more accurately, in oil tycoon circles from the 1950s. Rumor had it her late husband left her a fortune so deep it could drown cities. Others said she made the fortune and let the man take the credit while he drank himself into oblivion. Ethan didn't care much for rumors-only numbers. The house alone was worth over $20 million. He'd seen the property records. No children. No known heirs. A perfect storm. But the more he visited, the more he felt he was walking into something layered. Her words always had two meanings, her eyes always scanning. And yet, she never turned him away. In fact, she seemed to welcome his company. She asked questions about his life, his dreams, even his childhood, listening with a tenderness that didn't feel feigned. And for moments, brief moments, he found himself answering honestly. Almost. Until he caught himself. Don't fall for the act. She's the mark. Nothing more. Still, one afternoon, as they watched the koi fish drift lazily in the pond, she turned to him and said, "Ethan, how many women have you done this to?" He nearly dropped his glass of wine. "Done what?" he asked, voice even, the rehearsed innocence sliding in. She gave a short laugh, elegant as the swing of her silk scarf. "You're good, I'll give you that. But not good enough to lie to an old woman who has outlived men twice as dangerous as you." There was a silence. Ethan could hear the cicadas buzz in the heat, the creak of a wooden bench far off, the whisper of water. Her gaze didn't falter. "So," she said, crossing her legs slowly, "how far were you planning to take this? Marriage? Or just enough to get my signature on something?" His throat dried, but he didn't run. Instead, he smiled a slow, crooked thing and said, "Does it matter if we're both playing a game?" She blinked once. And then, to his shock, she smiled back. Not out of mockery. Not out of victory. Something else. Relief. She invited him to dinner that night. A private meal. Just the two of them in the drawing room, surrounded by portraits of people long gone, eyes in oil paint watching from gilded frames. He wore his best shirt. She wore a burgundy velvet dress that made her look like a queen of another era. The room smelled like jasmine and old money. "I suppose I owe you a story," she said, after the first course. "You don't owe me anything," Ethan replied. But he meant, "Please, tell me. Everyone thinks I inherited my husband's money." "What they don't know," she said, pouring herself a dark red wine, "is that I built it." She told him about New York in the 60s. about working in a male-dominated boardroom, about betrayal and clawing her way up and making enemies who underestimated her and paid for it dearly. She told him about a son who once tried to take everything from Heronley to disappear when the lawyers circled. A son? Ethan asked, caught off guard. She nodded. Robert. My only child. Or so I thought. The wine in his glass felt heavier now. What happened to him? He died, she said, voice calm. But not before leaving behind a legacy of deceit. And now, she paused, I find myself watching the same performance. Again. She didn't look at him when she said it. She looked at the fire. Ethan knew then she had known everything from the beginning. Every motive. Every line. Every manipulation. So why did you let me in? He asked quietly. She turned to him. Because I wanted to see if this time, the ending could be different. The following weeks blurred into a strange rhythm. They still had tea. Still walked in the garden. But now, the mask was off. At least partly. He admitted to the plan. She admitted to the trap. And yet neither walked away. Why did you let me get this close? He asked one morning, as they watched the rain from her veranda. Because loneliness is more dangerous than greed, she said simply. And for a while, you reminded me of something I'd lost. Ethan frowned. What's that? Hope, she whispered. Even false hope can feel warm. Those words stayed with him. More than they should have, because somewhere in that mansion of deception and forgotten tragedies, he began to feel something alien. Real affection. For her strength, her wit, her sorrow. For the first time in years, Ethan felt seen. Not just used, not just tolerated, but it was too late for guilt. Or maybe just too early. Until one morning, she handed him a key. Third floor, she said. East wing. Go. He found the room easily. It was different from the rest. Less grand. More intimate. Inside, there was a single desk, a locked chest, and photos scattered in golden frames. He saw her as a young woman, vibrant, fierce, alive. And he saw a boy, dark-haired, sharp-chinned, and a document. Ethan froze. It was a will, and his name was on it. Not once, but many times. He turned the page, trembling. His birth date. His old address. No. He rushed downstairs, heart thundering. She sat by the fire, waiting. You knew? He asked. This whole time. Her eyes were glassy, but her voice held. I always knew. From the first moment. The way you moved. Your mother's eyes. My son's carelessness. He staggered back. I'm not. You are, she said. Not in blood, but in what you were left with. The mess. The pain. The hunger. Ethan shook his head. What do you want from me? She stood, walked over, and placed her hand over his. Nothing, she said. Except this, don't become him. And for the first time, Ethan wept. Not because the con had failed, but because something far more dangerous had succeeded. He had begun to care. The next few days passed like walking through fog. Ethan wandered the estate with no real purpose. The morning light felt colder now, more intrusive. The hedges and stone fountains, once symbols of opportunity, now looked like monuments to a truth he had never wanted to uncover. He wasn't sure what unnerved him more, that Margaret had known everything or that she had forgiven him anyway. And then there was the will. He couldn't stop thinking about it. His name, his real Nami, on those pages. She hadn't just written it recently. The dates proved it. She had known long before he ever approached her. Known and waited. You knew my mother? He finally asked one evening, sitting across from her at the long dining table, a candle flickering between them. Margaret didn't answer right away. She sipped her tea and stared into the flame. I did, she said. Briefly. She came to me after Robert left her. Said he had run, left her with nothing but a child and shame. She didn't want money. She wanted to know if he'd ever loved her. If I thought he was capable of it. Ethan clenched his jaw. And what did you say? I told her the truth. Margaret's voice was steady. He loved what made him feel powerful. He loved appearances. But no, he didn't love her. Were you? He couldn't. Silence blanketed the room. Only the sound of the clock ticking echoed in the corners. I hated him, Ethan muttered. I still do. Margaret nodded gently. So did I? But hate, Ethan, it's heavy. It sinks you if you carry it too long. He looked up at her, eyes stinging. You put me in your will. She didn't flinch. I did. Why? Margaret's eyes met his. Because I saw the boy he abandoned, and the man he created, and I decided I would not leave this world letting his shadow be the last thing you inherited. He swallowed hard. You think I can change? I think, she said slowly, you already have. But change didn't come easy. Ethan started helping around the house not because she asked, but because he needed to do something. Something real. He fixed old shutters, repainted her garden bench, even cleaned out parts of the attic. The staff noticed, too. At first with suspicion, then curiosity, then quiet respect. He stayed for weeks. One day, while sorting through a box of Margaret's old letters, he found a photo. It was of a young man, blonde, suited, smiling, and next to him, a girl in a pale blue dress, holding a newborn baby. His mother. He hadn't seen her look that peaceful in years. He brought the photo downstairs and showed Margaret. She stared at it for a long time. She was beautiful, she said softly, and stronger than any of us gave her credit for. She died 5 years ago, Ethan whispered. Alone, in a hospital bed with unpaid bills. Margaret's hand covered his. She wouldn't have been, if she'd let me help. She didn't trust you, Ethan said, a tinge of bitterness still in his voice. No, she agreed. She didn't trust anyone. He looked down. Neither did I. Margaret smiled gently. But now you do? I'm trying, he replied. That night, Margaret fell ill. It started as a cough dry, persistent, but by morning, she was feverish. The doctor came and prescribed rest and fluids, warning of complications at her age. Ethan didn't leave her side. Not for meals. Not for sleep. He read to her classic poetry, the same romantic war novels he once pretended to love. She laughed, even when she was too weak to lift her head. You know, she whispered once, if you really had seduced me for my money, I probably would have let you. Ethan looked at her, startled. You would have? She smiled mischievously. A woman gets to decide how she wants to be remembered. He leaned closer. And how do you want to be remembered? Margaret closed her eyes, her voice barely audible. As someone who loved too late, but not too little. Ethan's throat burned. You're not too late, he said. Not yet. Days passed. Her health wavered. One morning, Ethan woke up to find Margaret sitting upright in bed, fully dressed in a blue silk blouse and pearl earrings. I'm taking a walk, she declared. You can barely stand. I've stood through worse, she replied. I want to go to the lake. He helped her, slowly, carefully, down the garden path. The staff stood aside, silent, watching with a reverence Ethan hadn't fully understood until now. Margaret was more than a wealthy woman to them. She was history, strength, legacy. They reached the lake. The water was still, reflecting the orange and purple hues of the setting sun. She sat on the wooden bench, Ethan beside her. I never got to name you, she said suddenly. He looked at her, startled. I thought about it sometimes, she continued. If your mother had allowed me to be part of your life, I would have called you James, after my father. He smiled faintly. Ethan's fine. She chuckled. Yes, it suits you. But I had to say it. Just once. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. The silence between them was no longer cold. It was shared. And for the first time in his life, Ethan felt like a son. Not a thief. Not a liar. Not a grifter. Just a son. That night, she gave him an envelope. If something happens, she said, this is yours. But don't open it unless I'm gone. You're not going anywhere, Ethan said quickly. The doctor said. She raised a hand. Let me finish. He fell silent. I spent a lifetime building walls, she said. Business, protection, reputation. And you walked right through them. Not because you were clever, but because you were lost. He nodded slowly. You reminded me of who I used to be before I became who I had to be. She placed the envelope on his lap. If I don't wake up tomorrow, I want you to know I forgive you. For all of it. Even the lies. His voice cracked. I don't want your money. She smiled, eyes glistening. Then take my love. It's worth more. She didn't die that night. But the days that followed changed something between them quietly, irrevocably. Margaret's strength returned in slow waves. She regained her appetite, insisted on sitting by the window again, even demanded that Ethan stop treating her like fine china about to crack. But there was something different in her eyes now, softer, perhaps, or maybe just more at peace. And in Ethan, there was a calm he had never known. No more pretending. No more schemes. He was no longer playing a role. He was just there by her side, day by day. And to his own surprise, he wanted nothing more. One evening, while they sat by the fireplace, Margaret said, "You still haven't opened the envelope." He looked at it. Still sealed. Still heavy with something that felt like truth. "I'm afraid," he admitted. "Of what?" she asked. "That it'll say you're really leaving," he said, forcing a smile. That this was all a goodbye. She reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "I'm not leaving," she said. "Not yet. And even when I do, it won't be the end." He wanted to believe her. Spring arrived slowly, like a long-held breath finally exhaled. Margaret began walking again. Not far, but enough to feel the air on her skin. She wore lighter colors now, pastel scarves, garden hats. And Ethan found himself waking earlier just to walk with her, his hand always ready beneath her elbow. "You look like you're guarding royalty," she joked once. He smiled. "Maybe I am." The house, once cold and distant, now felt like a home. He knew every hallway, every creaking floorboard, every place she liked to sit. He learned which tea she preferred depending on her mood, how she liked her books stacked, and that she couldn't fall asleep without the sound of wind chimes near her window. Sometimes they talked late into the night. About her past, his childhood, regrets, laughter, and sometimes they didn't talk at all. One such evening, while they were watching the stars from the veranda, she whispered, "You were never a mistake." Ethan turned. "What?" "Your father was," she said. "But you were the part of him that deserved to exist." He looked down, jaw clenched. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. But the peace didn't last. It was a Tuesday when the letter arrived delivered by hand, in a sleek black envelope. Margaret was pruning her roses. Ethan opened it without much thought. His blood turned cold. It was from a law firm, and the name at the top, Robert Hargrave. He was alive. He had never died. Margaret saw the look on Ethan's face before he even spoke. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the letter. Her eyes scanned it, slowly, methodically. Then she folded it and placed it on her lap, staring straight ahead. "So," she said softly, "he's come back." Ethan sat down beside her, heart pounding. "You told me he was dead." "I believed he was," she said. "He disappeared. Severed contact. Last I heard, he was in debt, running from creditors. And now he's suing you." Margaret nodded once. "For everything." Ethan stared. "Can he do that?" "He'll try," she said. "He always tries. But I won't let him win. Not this time." He leaned forward. "Let me help." Her eyes flicked to his. "You've helped more than you know." "No," Ethan said firmly. "I want to fight for you. Like you fought for yourself all these years. I'm not that con man anymore." She studied him. Then, finally, she nodded. "All right then, let's begin." They called her lawyer that night. Margaret had planned ahead trusts, legal defenses, documents airtight. But Robert, ever slippery, was smart. He wasn't going after the assets directly. He was challenging her capacity, claiming mental decline, claiming coercion, and using Ethan as the proof. "You must have known he'd do this," Ethan said, frustrated. "I did," Margaret replied. "But I also knew I couldn't live the rest of my life afraid of my own blood." He looked at her. "Then let me testify. Let me prove I didn't manipulate you." "No," she said sharply. That's exactly what he wants to drag you down with me. He knows your past. He'll use it. Then let him. Ethan's voice rose. I'm not ashamed anymore. Her face softened. You're willing to risk everything for me? She asked. He didn't hesitate. Yes. Margaret smiled, and for the first time, there were tears in her eyes. Then you truly are my son. The battle began. Robert's lawyers painted Ethan as a predator, young, opportunistic, crawling out of nowhere to charm a lonely widow. They called him an emotional manipulator, a professional seducer, and a parasite. Ethan took it all, sat in the courtroom beside Margaret, head high, silent, unshaken. When he was called to the stand, the room buzzed. He expected the questions to cut deep, and they did. Is it true that you approached Mrs. Hargrave pretending to be someone you're not? Yes, he answered, without shame. I lied about my past. My intentions. I had planned to take advantage of her. And yet she included you in her will. She did. Why? Because, Ethan said, his voice steady, I changed. Because she saw something in me no one else ever had. And because I love her. The courtroom went silent. Even the judge stared. Robert sneered from across the room. But Margaret, sitting in her tailored navy suit, nodded once. Proud. When she took the stand herself, her voice was clear, sharp, firm. I may be old, she said, but I am not senile. I chose to bring Ethan into my life. Not because he tricked me, but because he reminded me of everything I had once lost and everything I still had the power to give. And what about your son? The opposing lawyer asked. Margaret looked straight at Robert. My son died a long time ago. This man beside me is my family now. Robert stormed out of the courtroom. The case was dismissed. Margaret's will stood. Ethan stayed. That night, as they sat together watching the sunset, she turned to him. You could leave now, she said. Take what's yours. Start a life. He looked at her and smiled. I already have. The court battle left something lingering in the air, an unspoken weight between Margaret and Ethan. Not resentment, not regret, but the truth of mortality, like a soft bell ringing somewhere far away, warning them that time was not infinite. They returned to their routines. Tea on the veranda, evening walks, late-night stories. But it all felt more sacred now, more fragile. Ethan began writing again, something he hadn't done in years. Not schemes, not lies, real stories, inspired by her, her strength, her sorrow, her fire. One afternoon, he found Margaret in the study, standing before a portrait of her younger self and her late husband. I used to believe I could outlive loneliness, she said without turning. Build walls high enough to keep it out. Ethan stepped beside her. And did you? No, she whispered. But I learned to let someone in before it was too late. She looked at him, then truly looked. I won't be here forever, Ethan. I know, he said quietly. But I want you to promise me something. Anything. When I'm gone, don't go back to the person you were. Don't let grief make you cruel. Don't let the world harden you again. He nodded slowly. I won't. Because you didn't. She smiled faintly. You saved me just as much as I saved you. That night, Margaret didn't sleep well. Her breathing was shallow. Her hands cold. Ethan stayed at her bedside, reading from her favorite poetry book, even after she had closed her eyes. He watched her chest rise and fall. Each breath a miracle. Each moment a goodbye in disguise. At dawn, she stirred. You're still here, she murmured. Always, he said. She reached for his hand. Then I'm not afraid. Margaret passed quietly 3 days later, in the early morning, her hand still resting in his. The house was silent. Even the birds seemed to mourn. Ethan didn't cry at first. He simply sat there, holding her hand, whispering all the things he had never said aloud. Thank you. I love you. You were the first person who truly saw me. The staff wept. Neighbors sent flowers. The city paper ran a tribute, calling her a lioness of legacy. But none of it captured who she really was. Not the sharpness, not the softness, Not the way she had taken a broken man and given him the one thing he didn't know he needed, a mother. The will was read a week later. It was no surprise to anyone that Ethan had been left the estate, the trusts, the library, even the rose garden. But there was more. Margaret had left him a letter, handwritten, elegant, tied with a red silk ribbon. My dearest Ethan, if you're reading this, then I've gone where I can no longer protect you. But I hope I've taught you how to protect yourself. I know you came into my life with every intention of lying, but what you gave me in return was far more precious than honesty. You gave me companionship, purpose, and forgiveness. You gave me a reason to wake up each morning. And you reminded me of the woman I used to be before pain made me hide. You were never my mistake, Ethan. You were my miracle. Live boldly, love freely, and above all, don't ever be ashamed of who you were. Every step brought you here, with all the love this heart could hold. Margaret. He read it again, and again, and when he finally cried, he cried not just for her but for everything he'd lost and everything he'd found. Years passed. The estate became something different, still grand, but warmer. Ethan turned part of it into a foundation for at-risk youth. He mentored boys who reminded him of himself at 17, angry, lost, hungry for meaning. He gave them what Margaret had given him: books, time, trust. He published his first novel the year he turned 32. It was called The Last Rose of Winter, a fictional story, but rooted in truth. The dedication read, "For MEH, the woman who taught me how to live." Critics called it haunting and humane, but the praise didn't matter. What mattered was that her name was out there, living on. He still walked the garden every morning, the same path she had taken, now lined with plaques bearing quotes from her favorite poems. And on the edge of the lake, he built a white stone bench. Etched into it were 3 words: "You were enough." Sometimes, on quiet evenings, he sat on that bench and whispered into the wind, not out of grief, but gratitude, because he had tried to steal from her and instead, she gave him everything: a future, a name, a home, a heart. And Ethan, once a con, a shadow, a ghost, had become something real, a man worthy of being loved and loving back. The end.